As a global jewelry trade center, Hong Kong has experienced growing demand from emerging markets in recent years, which suggests potential revival of the jewelry industry. At the International Gemmological Conference 2024, international and local gemmologists and scholars were invited to share their insights on topics related to gemmology and jewelry history, as well as industry opportunities, advantages, innovations, and sustainability. We were grateful to have gem and jewelry historian Dr. Jack Ogden as our first keynote speaker. He delivered a speech titled Gold and Fire, A History of Jewelry Technology.
Thank you for inviting me to the university. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm very honored to be here. I have a very easy job. I have to cover 5,000 years of gold technology in 15 minutes. So it's impossible, right? So what I thought, I'd take one theme and cover that one theme through time. And I'll take the most important theme. My research for the last 50 years has been on the history of gold-making technology, how pieces were made, from the earliest times right up to the beginning of the 20th century. Studying the technology, fascinating. Everything I look at, I learn something new. And this is just an example. I do a lot of 3D reconstructions of old jewelry to how pieces were assembled. This is a bracelet in the British Museum. But I can't go through time giving each period. So I'll start with the very important thing. Do you recognize these? Yeah, of course you do. This is Egypt. It's 4,700 years ago in Egypt, the pyramids. You recognize this? A little closer, this is the Palace Museum in Hong Kong. So what's the difference? What is the difference between the two? Is it difference in art, or is it difference in technology? You can't have one without the other. The Egyptians couldn't have built the Palace Museum, even if they had the idea, because they didn't have the technology to do it. Technology and the advances in technology is the most important thing, really, in the history of any art form. So, question, how do you convert a piece of gold into something like this beautiful medieval crown? What do you do to get from one to the other? Well, you need tools and you need fire, the two things. The starting point of all gold jewelry is to melt the gold. And so the most important thing in the history of jewelry technology is fire. But there's a problem. A simple fire, like this little campfire, it's very difficult to melt gold with an ordinary fire. You need something more than just a fire that you're cooking on. You need to have like a furnace, the sort of thing they did in making pottery, the same heat. And that was about 7,000 years ago. They started to have the heat to make pottery, to melt gold, and do things. So you have the fire, you also have the tools. And you have a problem. These are very old tools, flint. You can't do good gold work with a flint tool. You need metal tools. Early days would be copper tools, copper alloys. But you can't make copper without fire. So again, fire is important. Fire was simply produced with charcoal, like you have on your barbecue, and you blow to get the temperature high so you can melt gold and do things with the gold. So this is so important, the fire, always fire. This is Egyptian wall painting of about 1400 BC. Now to work, this is some of the oldest gold work in the world. This is from Bulgaria and is about 4,500 BC. Now these are not difficult to make. If I gave you some kitchen foil, like you use in the kitchen to wrap things, and some wooden tools, you could all make this. It's not so difficult. But to do anything more sophisticated, you have to join the gold and you have to use other tools, metal tools. The copper tools I showed earlier, and of course today, iron tools. Iron needs higher temperatures than copper. And so iron tools were not possible until they could produce greater heat. And that only really came in at about 1200 BC, they began to be able to create iron. And once you had iron, you could do things you can't do with copper tools. For example, to engrave gold, to cut out the gold to engrave it. You can't do that with copper. You need iron. And so, from about 1200 BC, we start to see engraving on gold. We don't see it before. For example, this is a ring from Greece. It dates to about 1200 BC, and this is the earliest example of engraving I've ever found. You can see the marks, very shallow, not very deep engraving, not sharp like modern engraving. This is early engraving. So another thing where fire is important, you can't have engraving until you have fire. You can't solder gold without fire. Always fire. Later on, in the Roman period, they got better iron. They could produce harder iron, so they could have sharper tools, and they could do much sharper engraving and pierced work. So again, this was not possible before they had better iron, and that meant better fire. If we jump forward a little bit, this dates to the end of the 16th century, to 1576, and we can see on the right is a guy, he's not cooking his lunch, he's melting gold or making enamel. And that's just a closer view of him. Fire improved. I said cooking is food, but in fact, it's not far off, because the way they used to solder gold in the ancient times, and right through into this period, the end of the medieval period, beginning of the Renaissance, was more like making a pizza than the soldering you see today in a jewellery workshop. The whole object was heated, or the whole piece that you were soldering, the whole thing. You weren't doing a little flame at one little point. You were heating the whole thing. So something like this Greek earring, the top, you'd put all the pieces where you wanted them, and then heat the whole thing. So I'd say it's like baking a pizza rather than a modern soldering. Very, very different. Again, this is Photoshop. I didn't actually melt a Greek earring. So we start to see better, more precise soldering from about 1600. The goldsmiths here, where you had a flame and you blow and you get a very sharp, pointy flame. When this was invented, it opened up a whole new world because you could solder details, not the whole piece. It made a big, big difference. And this, I say, came in about 1600. A huge change in soldering, made possible because of better fire. Now, you might say, what's better about having a little lamp like this? But the problem was old lamps, the fuel, the oil, gave a lot of smoke, soot, blackness. And it's not good for soldering gold when you have black everywhere and smoke. You can't work. So they have better fuels coming in, clean flame, so it's possible to invent the soldering. So again, better fire. Then came what we call the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century. Suddenly there were new things. Big factories started. And what was new, the main thing that was new, was better fuel. You could have coal, which you dig from the ground, but what you could do is you could then, if you like, cook the coal and make what we call coke. I don't know what the Chinese for that, but it's kind of a fuel where you can get a higher temperature, and they could make very good steel. And also with heat, steam power. So the steam engine, steam-driven machinery, and good steel. And we have more change in the 18th century, more change in the jewellery industry than there'd been over the previous 4,000 years in that century. So much changed. Big factories, big steam engine, turning these things. This is actually textile, it's not jewellery, but it gives you an idea of the sort of factories that were growing up. Huge. Before you had little workshops with, what we call ma and pa, mother and father all working away and things. You have these big factories, big, big changes. With better steel, much better tools. One thing they could produce with good steel is a saw with a very fine blade. Now, how many have used one of these saws? How many weeks does the blade last? You're lucky if you get 2 minutes. It breaks. So when you have to make your own blades, it's not possible, of course. It was only when you have mass production possible you could make lots of blades, and it became feasible to do pierce work with a saw. Before that's not possible. So again, fire allowed better steel, which allowed fine saws. Tool for stamping gold and silver, stamp the parts. This kind of steel was only possible with better temperatures, better fire. Rolling mills to roll sheet metal. You put gold in here, turn the handle, and the other side it's thinner. Again, you keep going, it gets thinner and thinner, make sheet. Before they had to hammer out the sheet. Big, big change. So again, this was not possible until they had good steel. The good steel needed good heat. So everything is heat. An example. This is a teapot, English teapot in silver. This was made about 1720. It's a typical design, but this was hammered by hand. It was all hammered up by a silversmith into hand. Once you had rolling, you could produce silver sheet. Designs changed. And this is the sort of coffee pot, teapots you see. Now they could make sheet metal and fold it around, much easier to make a coffee pot. Possible again because you have better heat and so on. I keep repeating myself about heat, but you see what I mean? It's the most important thing. Platinum. This is a piece of platinum from a river. This is actually from Alaska, one of the largest pieces known. But they couldn't melt platinum. It was impossible. The temperature is too high. They tried. This is in France in 1774 with a big magnifying glass. You've all done this with a little magnifying glass and a fly on the ground or something to try and burn it. This they tried to melt platinum. They couldn't do it. They couldn't get the temperature until they found they could combine oxygen and hydrogen to make oxyhydrogen flame. Now they had high heat and they could start to make platinum. This really only happened about 1800. And here we have by 1876, diamond set in platinum, a brooch made by Tiffany in New York, one of the earliest pieces of diamond jewellery set in platinum. So this again is a result of heat, the ability to use platinum. So fire has ruled jewellery manufacture for 5,000 years. You think it's all about inspiration and clever craftsmen and all this sort of thing, but at the bottom, it's developments in fire technology through time has made this huge difference. So tools and fire. But you also do need the human brain, because you have to be able to realize the possibility, to understand what you can do with fire, what you can make with fire. You can make new tools, and with the tools, you can make jewelry. So you need the human mind. And that's the most important thing, isn't it? It's the human mind, the inquisitiveness and the inventiveness. What you need in the human mind to see the possibility of fire is the same as the human mind. Do you want to learn now? We want to learn more. And that's why we're going to have this wonderful new degree course here for the human mind to develop and to understand jewellery technology and gems. Thank you very much indeed.
Next, it is our honor to introduce our second speaker, Ms. Rosamond Clayton, a gemmologist, valuer, and expert witness, who spoke at the conference on opportunities of a career through valuing.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to the Metropolitan University of Hong Kong and to the Asian Gemmological Institute and Laboratory for inviting me. I'm very honored, and it's the most important thing because I lived in Hong Kong and I haven't been back for 30 years, but this has brought me back, so thank you very much. I'm here today representing the National Association of Jewellers in the UK. They are the leading organization for valuations and also the sort of main authority for jewellers in the UK. Part of the National Association of Jewellers is the Institute of Registered Valuers. And for a long time now, we have been looking at trying to promote our valuation course internationally. We don't have nearly enough members because valuing has developed into a great demand. Certainly, the valuers now in the major cities such as London and Birmingham, we seem to be overwhelmed with work, although I understand it is rather regional. If you're in the north of England, except for the high-profile valuers, they find it a little bit more difficult to find work. There's always this sort of illusion that if you go to London, it's rather like going to a medical specialist. You will get the best treatment there. So the same way they come to have their jewellery valued in London or perhaps Birmingham. So last year, while our chairman, Barry Sullivan, was at the awards at Goldsmiths Hall for the Gemmological Association, he was very impressed by the results from Hong Kong. There were so many students, not only who'd passed, but also had won all the awards. And he then telephoned me and said, "Do you know this person, Dr. Dominic Mock? Have you ever met him?" And I said, "Yes, he's a very old friend." And he said, "Well, I'm so impressed. This has to be our first port of call for trying to have a partnership for valuing." And you see here Dominic with all his successful students and all his award winners. It was an amazing achievement. So we have since been trying to develop a partnership, which I hope will be very successful for the future. My background is that I was a valuer in Hong Kong in the 1980s. I lived in Hong Kong for 18 years, and I sort of became a valuer overnight. In those days, one didn't have the type of training that one has now in the studying and the methodology of valuing, although I was fortunate enough, the company I was working for had several GGs who'd done residential courses with GIA and had become appraisers. And I also knew all the diamond prices, so that was sort of quite helpful. But apart from that, I wasn't in any way a trained valuer. I then went back to the UK and went on there with my valuation work. I now work from the London Diamond Bourse, which is a very helpful organisation. There are lots of contacts there with a lot of different abilities and knowledge on cutting and manufacturing and coloured gemstones and diamonds. And one of the most important things, particularly for me, I do a lot of work instructed as an expert, is my contacts. And people like Dr. Jack Ogden have always been very helpful to me, and other contacts. So really, I would say, apart from your knowledge of learning to be a valuer, the next important thing is your contacts and also your reputation, so that it can sort of snowball and you can have more and more work as you go on. Some of the types of bases of valuation that you might need in Hong Kong or other parts of the world would be a little different from the UK. We do a lot of valuing for insurance purposes. And when I was in Hong Kong, I used to value for the expatriates for insurance purposes. But mainly for the Chinese people, it was a different approach. It was usually something they wanted to know more about their jewellery, or they wanted to sell their jewellery. So you were looking at a different basis of value. These are the different areas where you might be called upon to value. Now, I'm going to give you a few case histories here. A lot of my clients come to me because they want some information about their jewellery. And this particular case was a fairly young man. Well, he was a young man to me. He probably didn't view himself as a young man. And his wife's parents, when his wife was 3 years old, they'd been sent this brooch by an aunt in South Africa. And she sent it in an envelope, just airmail post, no insurance. And they weren't quite sure about the surrounding stones, but they always thought that the large blue thing in the middle was a piece of glass. So when she was 3 years old, they gave it to her to play with in the garden. And she used to roll it on the stones and throw it down. And it became very badly damaged. The sapphire in the middle became very damaged. The diamonds survived. So when he brought it to me, I said to him, yes, it looked like a Ceylon sapphire. It calculated to about 26 carats, very nice color. And the problem was that it was so damaged. So the first thing here was when he said, well, it's much too big for any of our family to wear. So, could it be restored and could we sell it? So that was the next thing. So the first thing was to have to research a possible value in the restored state so that he could be insured while it was sort of going from place to place. And I first of all took it to a jeweller in Kent who'd set the centenary diamond, and he removed it from the setting. It was then taken by a contact friend of mine to Germany, and they were nervous about repolishing it. They thought that there was a lot of silk coming up underneath underneath where it was damaged, and they thought it might not survive repolishing. So they sent it back, which cost £600, and it had cost me £600 to go to Kent to have it removed from the setting. And so far we hadn't achieved anything. So then I went to another of my contacts, Steve Kennedy in Hatton Garden, to see what sort of report he would give on it if it was restored. And he said, we'll take it to the cutters in Hatton Garden who have great experience. So I did that, and they said, leave it on the bench and come back on Friday, and few sleepless nights. And when I went back, it was beautifully repolished. You could hardly see the silk. All the girdle was repolished. All the damage had gone. It then went to Christie's, and they sent it to SSEF because we then needed a further report on the sapphire. And the diamonds round it were each 1 carat, about sort of circa 1880, a perfect type of item for Christie's. They then said, estimate 70 to 120,000, but we guarantee 150. And then it sold for 190,000. So that was the sort of situation that one might have there. Now, the next thing is that in the UK, when somebody dies, we have inheritance tax, which has to be paid. And so we value for probate, that's the validation of the will. And any estate over 325,000 currently, until the next budget, there has to be tax paid on it. So if you have a house in the country or a smallest house or a flat in London, you can be fairly sure your estate is going to be worth more than that. So all your jewellery has to be valued for probate. And the basis of value for that, it has to be on the open market, which is at auction. And His Majesty's Revenue and Customs expect that you will value it either at the mid-auction estimate or at the hammer price. And you have to have a number of comparable items and what they have fetched at auction. And then the calculation of tax is based on the probate value of those items. Now, apart from the probate value, after swearing the probate, it gives the beneficiaries an idea of the value for the division amongst the different relations who are beneficiaries. So, for instance, this item here, a bracelet with old European cut diamonds, this is not after death. These people are very much alive. But even if you give your jewelry or gemstones away within 7 years of death, you have to pay the inheritance tax. But you hope that you can perhaps survive a little longer, and there will be no tax to pay on the gifts that have been made. So this is current now, and they've got 5 sons. So they'd already taken out some of the diamonds to make rings and earrings. Since this, I did a valuation of all the diamonds left there on what would be the net realizable asset if they were to sell into the trade or at auction. And they've now taken a few more of the smaller diamonds, and the center diamond is about 5.5 carats, and then the one on the right is 3.5 carats. They've now been taken out of the setting, and I now have to try and sell them. But the problem is that the market is so depressed at the moment, and people are being so cautious that it's a little bit of a struggle to sell anything. This is another probate situation. Nothing causes more stress, fights between relatives, than inheriting items of jewelry and other items. And this was a dispute between 2 brothers where the estate was left equally between them. But one of the brothers actually was holding the jewelry. So before having anything valued for probate, he had all the stones removed from the jewelry, and he took all the gold down to the bullion refinery and had it melted down, and we were left with the stones. And the other brother wasn't very pleased about that. One of the aspects is that obviously this again was Victorian jewelry. There were some photographs of it, but the stones weren't calibrated stones. They were nice quality, but they weren't really worth so much, not in the original Victorian settings. So I was asked as a single joint expert then to, from the photographs, assess the value on the open market that they would have fetched in their original state. And then it was settled out of court. The brother who'd removed all the stones obviously had to pay the compensation to the other brother. When I first came back from Hong Kong, I rented space with John Donald, who together with Grima was one of the leading 1960s designers and goldsmiths. And so for quite a time since I had my own office and since John Donald retired, for his clients, I've often worked on probate valuations because he had his clients in about the 1960s, 1970s. There are quite a few of them who later on the families have had to calculate the probate on different items of his that have been left. And other people have perhaps inherited pieces that were made by him and wanted to sell them rather than keep them. So this was one of the brooches where I had to assess again the value on the open market for one of his clients. And it's quite an interesting thing that, first of all, one of his clients was Princess Margaret. And so once she died, then the value of his jewellery more or less doubled at auction. And then sadly, last summer, he died. So there's no possibility of having any repairs by him, although he was in his 90s anyway. But he still did some work and some repairs. And now that he's gone, of course, his jewellery has increased more. And once you can't have something, then the value always increases. This is another situation here where it shows you must be influenced too much by what your clients say to you. This was a husband and wife who brought a circa 1910 pendant necklet to me, and also quite a lot of other jewellery, rather like the blue stone. They'd brought me a piece of green glass, which turned out to be a Colombian emerald of about 6.5 carats. And the pendant, which was quite interesting, was circa 1910, and it had a little pearl in it. It looked very nondescript to me at the beginning, and they were telling me that the mother had had no money, so these items couldn't be valuable at all. And so rather led by that, I looked at this pearl and thought it might be a cultured pearl. I should have realized from the setting that hadn't ever been touched that it was very unlikely to be a cultured pearl. But I took it into the bourse to one of the dealers there, and he looked at it and he said, "Oh, well, this is nothing. I'll offer £180. And I took it back to them and I said, no, don't accept it. It's too pretty to accept £180. And we didn't think much about it, and they went away, and I was having a report done on the emerald. Then after that, he rang me every day for about 3 telephone calls, and I suddenly realized that it was probably not going to be a cultured pearl. I then had it tested. It was a natural pearl and sort of worth in the region of $12,000 as a trade price. This is the pearl here, and this is the pendant that they finally had made with their emerald. And then finally, post-loss assessment, when we had the Hatton Garden robbery in Hatton Garden, I had to value some of the pearls that were lost, not these, but some others. And that is another important part of valuing, to do a post-loss assessment, the reconstruction of items that you haven't seen. Thank you very much indeed.
Finally, we are pleased to have as our third speaker, Mr. Martin P. Steinbach, a gemmologist, gem trader, and author who delivered a speech titled Gems with a Star, a Fascinating and Colorful World.
I would like to thank you, Dr. Dominic Mark, and this beautiful university to be invited here. It's a big pleasure and a big honor to be here. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the time is pretty short, so we're going to move to the stars, gemstone with the stars. So mostly people talking about star sapphire and star ruby, but you got about 50 different stones which can show stars. Well, it's a lot of text. It's in English and Chinese, makes things easy. So In general, you have 6 red stars, you can have 4 red stars, 12 red 24 rays, and all creating this kind of asterism. A very good example of a star ruby necklace sold by Christie's $2.6 million here in Hong Kong. The star ruby, the queen of the star stones. We are in the chapter of famous stars. So the Star of Asia with 330 carat, one of the most beautiful ones in the world. The Star of Adam on the right, 1,400 carats. Well, I had this stone in my hand in Hong Kong about 2016. And if as a gemmologist and a gem dealer, if you have a stone like this in your hand, you're not forgetting this. So this stone was getting up by appraisal, we talked about appraisal before, to $300 million US. So let's talk a little bit about history. You can trace back asterism, the star stones, about 2,000 years to the old Greek, Dionysius Periegetes, who was the first to mention it, Pliny the Elder, about the 37th book about Historia Naturalis, mentioned it during the Roman period, so about 2,000–3,000 years already ago, star stones was famous. Asia is the most important sources of stars, so in general it's Sri Lanka, but also Myanmar, Burma. There are some smaller sources in India. This is an antique map. Come back a little bit to the star ruby. On the left, you see a very fine quality. On the right, you see Vietnamese star rubies. You can have star rubies from about 20 different sources, commercial and not commercial. On the left, you see a very fantastic blue star sapphire. You probably all know star sapphires. And on the right is a fine black star sapphire, Bangka Char mining in Canterbury in Thailand. It's very fine quality. On the left, you see an example of a 6-red star rose quartz. And on the right, you see a star garnet. You see with 2 stars. There's 1 star, and there's another crystal intergrown, and this garnet showing a 2nd star over here. Pretty rare. The guy is not important. Important is the stone. It's a 739 carat star diopside, the biggest one I ever saw in my life. On the right, you see another commercial star. It's a star moonstone. Kangyam, South India, is the source of many of these stones. Trapiche emeralds. You probably all know trapiche emeralds, or maybe I guess. It's the trapiche structured gemstone which you can use in jewelry because you got plenty of supply, you got very good qualities, and it's all different formations of this kind of star which is fixed. That means you don't have a star reflected light, you have a fixed pattern of stars. Richard Hugh's picture, silk needles creating the star, 60, 120 degrees angles. Very nice picture, many, many different star formations. You see if you have only one line, it's a cat's eye effect, you probably know that. So you can have double cat's eye, you can have 4 red stars, rectangular angles here, 60 degrees angles. You can have broad stars. This one you can have 5 stars on one surface. It's a very nice arrangement of different star formations. Main sources of star gems, you have many maps about gemstone sources in the world, for example, diamonds or ruby and sapphires. So what you're seeing here is the first map only about star stones. Again, Sri Lanka, as you can see over here, in general, the finest source for star stones. Mining operations, Thailand, Canterbury, close to the border to Cambodia. I made these pictures in 1987 or something. Famous for black star sapphires, green star sapphires, golden star sapphires. It's also a little bit the history about culture. Like what the Hindus say, it's a mysterious phenomenon which is maybe not easy to understand. And the Star of Destiny is a very famous quote. The rays, when they meet, difficult to say exactly what it means. Is the star on top of the stone? Is it inside the stone? And it's also a little bit mysterious. This picture I think we have seen today already. It's the crown of bronze. It's in the Munich Museum in Germany. And it has a star in the top over here. You see this one. Now we come a little bit to the collector's editions of stars. Amazonite. I was the one who found the stone. Cheap material, can have beautiful stars. This is the only known 6 red star apatite of the world on the right. Star bronzite, pyroxene mineral bronzite. This you have a kind of 8-rate star formation. On the right, you see the biggest star iolite. It's probably the biggest one in the world with nearly about 200 carats, very rare. The so-called star diamonds. If you talk to a hardcore diamond dealer and you ask them if you have seen stars on a diamond, they will say no about 95%. So what we have here is you have an octahedron, you have a kind of Star of David pattern. These are hydrogen clouds. Hydrogen clouds inside the octahedron forming the star-like pattern. And what's even much more rare is on the right, you have cabochons. Of course, you need cabochons to create a star. You cannot have a faceted stone. So in these cabochons, the stone were examined by the GIA in the US, and these little cabochons, the quality is not so good, but they show a 4-rate star. So normally there are no diamonds known with this kind of 4-rate stars in reflected light. On the left, you see a Starulka sphere. It's a sphere. It was at the GIA symposium for a long time mentioned over there. And you have a 4-rate star, Sweet Home Mine, America, very rare and pretty cool rare star. On the right, you see a star scheelite from Sri Lanka. It's a heavy mineral, it's in yellow, it's a big size, also extremely rare. Star spinels. Spinel now in commercial qualities, faceted stones. On the left, you see a twin star spinel, very rare picture, very famous picture in gemmology. And you have the crystal with the twinning of the stars. On the right, you see a full set of star spinel. This was in Sri Lanka, by the way. And it's a little bit arranged like a starman. Star tanzanite. So if you go to the gem fair, for example, at the airport, the World Gems Expo, I consider it as the biggest gem fair in the world. It's nothing like this in quantity and in quality. So you should go there. It's for professionals, but it's absolutely worth to see. So if you talk to the tanzanite dealers over there, they have millions of US dollars in stock of tanzanite, faceted material, until 100, 150, 200 carats and more per piece, by the way. But I would bet pretty sure, you can win my new book if you bet about it, that I've never seen a star tanzanite. And here you're seeing a star tanzanite. Cat's eye is a little bit common nowadays, but if the rays meet, like on the star, it's extremely rare. On the right, you see another extremely rare star gem. It's the star topaz. I think we all know topaz. This one is from Ukraine. It's also pretty interesting. That's from Ukraine. And it's a big stone, 281 carats out of my private collection, and it's showing a 6-rate star. Now we come a little bit back to the famous stones, like star ruby. Rosaries on the left, undisputed the #1 in the world. I saw it in the Smithsonian in 1992. The Starry Night sapphire on the right, good example for a very good quality star sapphire. And in the middle is the Mountain Star Ruby collection. The funny thing is, for the gemmologists under us, the stone originated from North Carolina. Normally nobody knows that in North Carolina you can have stones like this. Appraised $120 million US. I call it funny appraisals. Has not much to do with the real life. Treatments, still a technical chapter here. Glass-filled star rubies. It's very difficult nowadays on the left. You got rubies which are treated with glass. It makes things very difficult. On the right, you have a diffusion-treated star sapphire. Also very difficult in commercial sizes. The treatment is possible to detect, but not easy. Imitations. You can have triplets on the left, used to imitate red star ruby and blue star sapphire, of course. 3 parts. On the right, you see, I call it the red devil star ruby. It's the only star ruby, it's in my private collection. It's a plastic-coated stone. So it was a white, colorless star sapphire, and it's famous. It was in several books and several publications, and it's plastic-coated. Synthetic stars. Typical bone on the left. On the right, I like this round one. It's a sphere from the GIA in Japan. And the thing is, it weighs about nearly 1 kilo, 2 pounds. You can see it, 4,759 carats. Synthetic star opal on the left, very rare. Synthetic star silicate on the right. This is a little bit jewelry section of my new book, Stars in Exception Jewelry. Interesting in the middle, this is the biggest black star sapphire in the world. It's called the Star of Jolie, designed with Angelina Jolie. I think you know her, more or less. 800, lucky number, by the way, 888.88 carats. I think very lucky number, right? Well, I was asked to talk a little bit about future trends. Blockchain technology is a big thing nowadays, from the mine to the finished piece of jewelry. What you see downstairs are also diamonds, what I mentioned before, with a kind of star-like pattern. Well, I'm talking sometimes about this outrage of treatments. Blue star sapphire, you take a fine red star ruby, very rare, and you burn the needles out to fasten the stone. I call it an outrage, because especially fine star rubies, 5 carats up, are extremely rare. And so it's really sad, breaking my heart every time. So we're coming to the end. Thank you very much for listening.